Franklin D. Roosevelt, the life of a leader who redefined America. Hi, friends. Few American presidents have left as profound and lasting an impact on the nation as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd President of the United States. Serving from 1933 to 1945, Roosevelt guided the country through two of its greatest crises, the Great Depression and World War II. But the story of FDR is not just one of leadership and politics. It is also a story of resilience, privilege, and reinvention. Early life and family heritage. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was born on January 30, 1882 in Hyde Park, New York, into one of the most distinguished families in the state. His father, James Roosevelt, was a wealthy landowner and businessman with connections to the Democratic Party, while his mother, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, came from a family whose fortune had been built on trade and shipping. Franklin was their only child, and his upbringing was marked by both luxury and parental devotion. His mother in particular played a dominant role in his early life, deeply affectionate but also controlling. She managed nearly every aspect of young Franklin's development, fostering in him a sense of discipline, confidence, and moral responsibility. Growing up amid wealth and privilege, Roosevelt's childhood was idyllic. He spent his days riding horses, sailing on the Hudson River, and studying under private tutors. Yet his life was not entirely sheltered. His parents emphasized public service and duty, values that would later become the bedrock of his political philosophy. Education and early influences. Roosevelt's formal education began at the Groton School, an elite preparatory institution in Massachusetts, where he was shaped by the stern but idealistic teachings of headmaster Endicott Peabody. Peabody instilled in his students a sense of social duty, the belief that those born with privilege had an obligation to serve others. This moral framework profoundly influenced Roosevelt's worldview. From Groton, he went on to Harvard University, where he studied history and political science. While not an outstanding student academically, Roosevelt excelled socially. He was outgoing, charming, and ambitious, traits that mirrored those of his distant cousin Theodore Roosevelt, who was then President of the United States. Franklin admired Theodore deeply and saw in him a model of energetic leadership. The influence was so strong that Franklin even adopted many of Theodore's political ideas and mannerisms. After Harvard, Franklin attended Columbia Law School, though he left before graduating, having passed the New York bar exam in 1907. His early legal career was short-lived. However, the world of law lacked the excitement and human engagement that Roosevelt craved. Politics soon called to him. Marriage and family life. In 1905, Roosevelt married Eleanor Roosevelt, his fifth cousin and the niece of Theodore Roosevelt. Their wedding was a grand affair, attended by President Theodore Roosevelt himself, who famously gave away the bride. Eleanor was intelligent, thoughtful, and socially conscious. Though shy by nature, she would later become one of the most influential first ladies in American history. The couple had 6 children, 5 of whom survived into adulthood. Their marriage, however, was far from perfect. While bound by mutual respect and shared ideals, it suffered from emotional distance and Roosevelt's infidelity, particularly his affair with Lucy Mercer, Eleanor's social secretary, discovered in 1918. Though they never divorced, the incident forever altered their relationship, transforming it into more of a political partnership than a romantic one. Early political career. Roosevelt's political ascent began in 1910, when he ran for the New York State Senate as a Democrat from a heavily Republican district, and won. His victory demonstrated both his charisma and his ability to connect with ordinary voters. In Albany, he gained a reputation as a reformer, opposing powerful party bosses and supporting progressive legislation. In 1913, President Woodrow Wilson appointed him Assistant Secretary of the Navy, a position once held by his cousin Theodore. Roosevelt threw himself into the job with vigor, modernizing the Navy and improving its efficiency. During World War I, he gained valuable experience in administration and leadership, working closely with naval officers and policymakers. By the war's end, Roosevelt had established himself as one of the rising stars of the Democratic Party. In 1920, he was nominated as the vice presidential candidate on the ticket with James M. Cox, the Democratic nominee for president. Although they lost the election to Warren G. Harding and Calvin Coolidge, Roosevelt's national profile grew significantly. He was only 38 years old and seemed destined for higher office. The struggle with polio. Then, in the summer of 1921, tragedy struck. While vacationing at his family's summer home on Campobello Island, Roosevelt was suddenly stricken with poliomyelitis, polio, a viral disease that left him permanently paralyzed from the waist down. The illness was devastating, not only physically, but also emotionally. For months, he struggled with despair and isolation, as he faced the possibility that his political career might be over. But Roosevelt refused to accept defeat. His indomitable spirit drove him to years of physical therapy and rehabilitation. He experimented with various treatments, including hydrotherapy, which led him to establish the Warm Springs Foundation in Georgia, a center for polio patients that would later bear his name. Although he never regained the use of his legs, Roosevelt developed extraordinary upper body strength and learned to appear upright in public using braces and canes. His courage in the face of disability became one of the defining aspects of his character. Behind the scenes, he depended heavily on his wife Eleanor and his close advisor Lewis Howe, both of whom encouraged him to re-enter politics. Return to public life. By 1928, Roosevelt had regained his political footing and successfully ran for governor of New York. His leadership during the early years of the Great Depression, particularly his innovative social welfare programs and public works initiatives, earned him national attention. He showed empathy for the unemployed and a willingness to experiment with government solutions, traits that distinguished him from other politicians of his time. When the Democratic Party sought a dynamic and compassionate leader for the 1932 presidential election, Roosevelt was the obvious choice. Campaigning under the slogan, "A New Deal for the American People," he promised action, hope, and recovery from the nation's economic despair. Becoming president. In 1932, Roosevelt defeated incumbent Herbert Hoover in a landslide. The country was in the depths of the Great Depression. Banks were failing, unemployment had soared, and faith in government was at a historic low. Roosevelt's inaugural address on March 4, 1933, contained one of the most famous lines in American history: "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." These words captured the spirit of his presidency, a belief in optimism, courage, and the power of collective action. Within his first 100 days, Roosevelt launched a whirlwind of legislative reforms known as the New Deal. These programs aimed to stabilize the economy, provide jobs, and restore confidence in the American system. Agencies like the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, Public Works Administration, PWA, and Social Security transformed the role of government in everyday life. Roosevelt's leadership style was both personal and visionary. Through his famous fireside chats, informal radio broadcasts to the American people, he reassured millions during the darkest times, speaking with warmth and clarity that made citizens feel he was addressing them directly. Legacy of resilience and leadership. Roosevelt would go on to be elected 4 times, serving longer than any other U.S. president. His administration not only led the nation out of economic collapse, but also guided it through World War II, laying the foundations for America's emergence as a global superpower. Behind the political achievements, however, remained the story of a man who refused to yield to adversity, who overcame personal paralysis to lead a paralyzed nation. His resilience, compassion, and unshakable belief in democracy defined an era and reshaped the relationship between the American people and their government. Franklin D. Roosevelt passed away on April 12, 1945 at Warm Springs, Georgia, just months before the end of World War II. His death marked the close of one of the most consequential chapters in American history. Franklin D. Roosevelt's life was a journey from privilege to empathy, from personal suffering to national triumph. He embodied the ideals of perseverance, leadership, and service. In the face of both physical paralysis and national despair, Roosevelt stood as a symbol of strength and hope. His legacy endures not only in the institutions he built, but in the spirit of a nation that learned, through his example, that courage and compassion can overcome even the gravest challenges.